Teams are a big part of the way that 311 is working right now, and I think it's because the content is professional grade, and I find that kids can really knock it down when they work together. Already, you guys have given us a great first week where your teams really came together and you did well and you mastered the content. So I was thinking, okay, you've got a good momentum. We're going to keep using your teams. But this will be the first week that an actual graded assignment is given, and I'm sure many of you want to make sure that you're covered and you have a fair system. What I don't like about teams is that usually if you're teamed with somebody exceptional, then that person is going to hold a much higher bar and is going to hold the group to a higher bar and is going to want to push the fence. That's what exceptional people do. And they're not going to accept an underdeveloped project. And so the most desirable people to be within the groups are going to be the people who fundamentally want to push the group. That's an irony because an exceptional person won't find their soulmate within the group. They will find people of different ages and expectations and skill sets, and they may well find that they are biting off more than they could chew. And so usually within teams, the American corporate system has a theory called the hero theory, where that exceptional person is the reason why the team excels. And it's what happens in sports. It's what happens in business. It certainly happens that way in politics. We all depend upon leaders to make teams work. And anarchy is not a system. There's usually pyramids where people have a good idea and everybody says, great idea, I want to do your idea. And that person says, okay, let's break it up. But there has to be some fairness so that people don't get burned out by the groups. I didn't go to school with groups. I mean, my graduate school, there was lots of groups. My undergrad, there weren't groups. And I wonder where I learned more. Does that make sense? I believe that teams are inadequate when compared to what individuals accomplish. Teams are a way of allowing the inmates to run the asylum. Does that make sense? However, there's some very important learnings that take place from groups that I'm sure I didn't get in my undergrad in the 90s when teams were not a part of the way that things were done. And what I believe is when you're inside of a business school environment, the team becomes a good place to learn business skills. Does that make sense? One of the primary lessons that you learn within certainly the American business system, within a larger business law context, is that contracts rule everything. You can't make a reasonable expectation without some kind of agreement ahead of time. And we usually codify that with a contract. We have a constitutional kind of a contractual system here. Does that make sense? Again, anarchy does not rule. Order is what causes there to be efficiency. So a good question is, well, what if a very exceptional person was on my team, and how do I rein that person in so that everybody has reasonable expectations while we do something worth doing, right, that we all like? And really, the way to do that is to create a contract ahead of time where you say, well, look, why don't we all agree on a set of expectations? Let's write it down so that they're not controvertible, right? And then let's agree upon it, and then we'll execute upon those. And then we'll ask the instructor to evaluate us based on those agreements. Does that make sense? And so me as an instructor, it's extremely rare that teams actually snitch on each other. Does that make sense, for lack of a better word? It's extremely rare where teams say, look, I have this team member who's clearly inadequate, who's clearly not pulling their weight. It almost never happens. Does that make sense? And a big reason why teams predominate is because, well, instead of having 30 pieces of code to grade, I now have 6. Obviously, it works well for a unionized teacher culture to have less work. Does that make sense? And so there's a lot of corruption in that, in having teams. So really what I have my antennae out is, I think it's better for students to work through complex projects in teams, except in cases where one person does all the work. The exceptional kid says, I've created a death march and I've asked for everybody to do something difficult, and now everybody likes me, but they won't do the hard work. Now I have to do all the hard work. Okay, here it goes. There are guys, girls, there are reasons why we have certain people who make $130,000 upon graduation here, and we have the average student group who makes 70. Now, $70K for an undergraduate is a great salary. Go ahead, ask your parents if that's good. They'll say, yup, we're proud of you. If you are the average student out of our program, you will be out earning the next group of outstanding graduates by 10%. That's the technology and operations management people. I think we can all agree that they're all outstanding people in Tom. That's how I see them. They're all general managers. They're all MBA material out the gate. You out-earn them by 10%. That's a lot in any comparison. That means that you always have money to buy people drinks at the end of the month. Like, you're the person with more money. Does that make sense? These skills are worth more. But let's say that not everybody's equal. There are some people with more talent, with more drive, with more toughness, with better, more principled families, with more free time, with a less of a commute. Nobody's the same. Nobody has the same life, you know? So within a team, it's important to have some kind of constitution where we go into projects together, right? And at the end of the grading period, when the professor says, okay, let's turn in your work, please, you should be able to say, well, look, we underperformed, and here's what everybody was supposed to do. And therefore, you, at no time during this class are you ever in a position to snitch. However, the group is likely to say, hey, Mr. Bunn, we missed a little bit of it. I hope you won't kill us on it. Of course, I'm not going to kill you on it, but I'm going to find a way to get you maximum credit, and then we're going to grade it, fairly. And we'll say, well, who is in charge of this and that? And instead of interrogating, I'm just going to say, okay, where is your contract? Where is the manifest? And the manifest is a list of items that you should have agreed on ahead of time. Does that make sense? So if you have some holes in your project and you don't want that hole to become your grade, you better supply a manifest. And therefore I can say, okay, no problem. Give me your project and we'll take a look. And if there's some ding somewhere or something that isn't quite finished, we won't take that off of the team. We'll take it off of the person who is supposed to do it. Given the fact that you all are adults and you can agree to things, and as long as it's a reasonable agreement and you all agreed to it, then that's how we're going to grade it. Does that make sense? So this is where the business education piece comes in. Write a strong contract. Agree to something that you can deliver, right? Don't put it all off on somebody else. Don't steal somebody else's work. These are good principles that teams can instruct in. Does that make sense? Frankly, I was at Harvard as a graduate school, and there was a young woman there who was a very, very good student, exceptional, hard worker, and there were a team of guys who found her project and destroyed it. I've never seen a more crude, primitive, anarchic culture as what I saw at Harvard. And I'm sure it's still there. The young woman, she built a model, it was about 8 feet long, of a city block, and she put all these gorgeous little model buildings on it. It was at architecture school. And a bunch of guys found it, and they cracked it in half. They put a sledgehammer through it. And so I suspect criminality from even the highborn. Does that make sense? Yeah, and let me say this. It's very rare that I find that kind of incivility among you all. I've never seen that kind of barbarism here. Does that make sense? So what I want to say is that, let's not have groups that go off the rails. Let's have groups that really make it worth doing. So here's the basic team grading rubric. Each team member is delegated responsibilities and is held accountable, right? Job assignments must be equal among all team members to be binding. So if we find that one person was supposed to do the hard stuff, we won't respect it. We'll throw it out and we'll say the team should have split it up. We'll save the bright kid who worked hard and we'll throw out the rest. Does that make sense? Like, these things happen quickly, like you're dealing with adults on the other side of the table. So, and everybody here at this college is that kind of professional. An equal difficulty of work is to be assigned among all team members. So we don't want to find that, this student was supposed to create a hyperlink. This student was assigned 2 minutes of work. And then this student over here was assigned 12 hours of work. We're going to throw that out. And we're going to say, the kid who did the most work, he survives, or she survives. And this kid who is clearly a theft monger, we're going to crush that kid. Does that make sense? We're going to put that on record. not crush the kid, but you know what I mean. We're not going to let him get away with it, you know. So a manifest or a list of assigned duties is created before work begins. The manifest acts contractually in a binding manner. So now this is a good lesson for life, which is when you have the chance to create an agreement, don't blow it off. Don't assume that you can slink by it. There's a moment in time that counts. And when it comes to creating agreements and signing off on something, that's what matters. That counts. I think that you all will live up to that task. You all will succeed at that. Does that make sense? And that contractual element is the reason why your project will proceed nicely, because you actually took time at the beginning to engineer how people work together. Does that make sense? That's a lesson not only from business, but in the technology arena, where everybody has heavy weight to pull, right? Microsoft is really the genesis of that kind of extreme teamwork culture, right? That's why you have an operating system, because of people engineering. If you think about that, right? It's important. You all can do that, right? Now, in cases where team dissatisfaction exists, an email is to be sent to the instructor through the university email, something that we can archive, right? If there's ever grades are serious, they're real, so we have to do it professionally. The instructor will ask for the manifest and grade the project for each student individually according to the items as they stand on the manifest. Now, you don't need to bust anybody. What if you had somebody on your team who is just not pulling their weight? You don't need to bust that person. You're not obligated to say anything about anybody. Does that make sense? In many ways, if I heard a student, saying something negative about another student, I would probably disregard it, because no accusation should become the basis for prosecuting somebody else. Does that make sense? Accusation shines a light that there may well be something wrong happening, but there's plenty of fake accusations that go around, and I would never want that to become the grounds to stop a kid from getting a good grade. Does that make sense? Just because you accuse somebody, it doesn't mean that they're guilty. Very simple principle, So that precludes people from abusing any given legal system. These days, I'm not sure if the culture is interested. These days, if you accuse somebody, they're allowed to be damaged. History will not reward us for that. Law and order does not allow for accusation to become the basis for prosecution. And it won't work that way in this class too. So you don't need to say anything bad about anybody. You can just say, hey, Mr. Bunn, here's our manifest. Here's our project. Done. Therefore, if you do your part, you're going to come out fine. Things are going to go well for you. But you have to protect yourself at the very beginning of the project by saying, here's what I signed on to do. Everybody approved me doing this. And then we'll say, great, you did fine. Let me say this. Inside of every given corporation, teams are sacred. Go to Goldman Sachs, team is sacred, right? And so here it's a big deal too. I would say that's a level of human sophistication that we didn't have in academia in the 1990s. Now we have it. So in many ways you get two educations. One is a business legal education. The other is a technical education, right? So that's the way I'd like it to work. And we'll see how it works. We may need to adjust this, but let me know what you think. Now, let's check out Unit 1. Here's what you got to do. So let me stop the video right now, and we'll do something else.